now let us bring in Vanity Fair staff writer Caleb Ecarma. He covered yesterday's events from Washington and also covered the Black Lives Matter protests in the city over the summer. Thanks for joining us, Caleb. First off, I'm going to ask you, you spoke to people who were inside the Capitol building in the middle of this chaos. What did they tell you about their experiences and how they felt the situation was handled?
And thanks for having me on, Anne-Marie. Once we were inside around the Capitol building and inside of it, talking to protesters, a lot of them used, I guess, some rhetoric that is sort of like the Tea Party protest, similar to like talking about overthrowing a radical government that has gone out of control, and mirroring what happened in 1776. And essentially saying that the Second Amendment was made for a time like this. And so, that's why we have it, and that's what we're going to do. And that was essentially the message that they were relaying throughout the crowd.
So the others that were inside there, though, like people who were not part of the protest, I don't know if you got a chance to speak to anybody, but, how did they feel about how quickly and how easily these protesters were able to get into the Capitol building and essentially take over?
Yeah, everyone was really amazed. I mean, this is supposed to be one of the most secure buildings in one of the most police cities in the world, and yet they pretty much just skipped, their way right in there, past the guards and past all the security, past the Capitol Police. And I hadn't really seen anything quite like that in terms of police standing down in the way that they did, and really just rolling over and letting the protesters just run roughshod to however they want. I haven't seen anything like that since I covered Charlottesville in 2017 at Unite the Right, where you had a similar situation with far-right agitators, coming in from out of town into a city, descending upon it, and then being allowed to do essentially whatever they want until the violence escalates to the point where somebody dies. And that's exactly what happened yesterday, and that's what happened in Charlottesville as well.
That is quite an interesting comparison. Another comparison, we pointed out that you covered the Black Lives Matter protests during the summertime there. And you've probably seen the images that people have been putting up on social media, images that were taken during the Black Lives Matter protests versus images that they're seeing now. The Capitol steps or armed guards sort of everywhere during the Black Lives Matter protests versus these, protesters kind of walking right up to the front door or the door of the Capitol, breaking through the window with no one really stopping them. Can you, because I wasn't on the ground, but you were. Can you sort of compare and contrast the difference between what you saw yesterday and what you saw in the summertime when it came to law enforcement and their preparation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really a night and day difference. This is today. Yesterday, it felt as if they were mall security trying to stop, really just massive groups of people all flooding into the two, main entrances, and essentially getting reinforcements because as the first, entry was broken into, more people, more protesters, and the Trump mobs started amassing in larger quantities just by way of Pennsylvania Avenue and walking down the mall. And so these groups kept growing and growing, and you weren't seeing this quick response where you have, SWAT teams showing up. You didn't have the tear gas was not deployed in the same liberal manner that it was against the Black Lives Matter protests in June. So it was, the contrast was incredibly stark, especially being with I covered the June protests on the ground for so many days and nights, and I was out there for the first few days where there wasn't even any agitation from the protesters, right? And then they were still getting tear gas and pepper sprayed, and oftentimes the police would begin escalating things like that, but either using some sort of riot control gas or just beating people with batons, and that's when things would really start to escalate, where suddenly, that kind of changes the rules of engagement with the protesters. But here you had one side, the Trump mob basically getting riled up and exerting violence on the police and anyone who really stood in their way, even journalists. I saw a lot of journalists get harassed, and physically and verbally, of course. But it that even though that they were the ones, the protesters, here in this case, were the ones taking out the violence on the police still showed the utmost leniency when in June, it was no expense and no mercy was spared for any of those protesters. Really, I saw kids getting arrested and beat, in the streets in June, whereas I think there was only 13 or 14 people arrested already, and we're talking about, in June, people broke into a Louis Vuitton store. And today or yesterday, they have people breaking into, hundreds of people breaking into the America's heart and the city's, one of the city's most secure buildings. So the differences really tell the whole story in terms of a majority white crowd in Wednesday's Trump protest versus the majority black crowd and a black advocacy group, in June. So, I mean, I think that really tells the whole story.
Both in June and yesterday, there were calls for the president to say something that would soothe these crowds. What we saw in the summer is he had police clear away protesters so he could walk across the path, stand in front of a church, hold up a Bible, essentially have a photo op. He didn't even say anything. I spoke to somebody who attended the protests yesterday and asked them, we spoke earlier, and asked them whether or not she felt that the president's words at the rally yesterday had an impact on the mood of the crowd. She said no. But I want to ask you, how do you compare when you look at what the president did and said in the summertime versus what he did and said yesterday, and how he contributed to the turn, the mood of the crowd yesterday and in the summertime? Contributed or helped, or your take on his words?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's indisputable that Trump most definitely agitated the crowd and worked them up. I mean, this was an official Trump campaign event, breaking into the Capitol building. It was an official Trump campaign event. It was an extension of the rally. It was an extension of the everything he's been saying about the election and his delusional denial of it for the past 8 weeks. So I don't know how anyone could see this in any other way than a direct incitement of violence by the president and many of his top supporters in Congress, both sides, whether it's among the 13 senators who are in denial of the election results, or if it's the 100 Congress members, on both sides. The blame can be pretty much doled out just about evenly there. But when it comes to who really is at the heart of the matter, it's of course the president. Just basically, even after he has called off the dogs and said, everyone go home peacefully, please don't attack the, boys and girls in blue. Even after that, he was still saying, this election was rigged. It's one of the most, despicable things in the history of this country, but you should go home. But, also, it's terrible. So the mixed message there, even after they're breaking into the Capitol building, even after violence is, going viral on social media and it's all over the news. So he knows what's happening, and yet he still would, barely made overtures to going against it.
Caleb, really good talking to somebody who was on the ground for both instances, both what happened this summer and what happened yesterday. Really enjoyed hearing your perspective. Thank you.